my name is Morgen, and this is my Principles of Selling final project. In order to complete this project, I conducted interviews with Brian Landis, Scott Panning, and Mike Cook, and I asked them questions about 11 of the topics that we covered in class. So throughout this presentation, I'll go over the topics we covered in class, my questions to the interviewees, and their answers and how it applies to what we learned in class. So to start off, the topics that I'm going to be covering are self-leadership, understanding the buyer, building trust, building a customer network, the importance of teamwork, earning commitment, addressing concerns, ethics in sales, the importance of communication, the importance of communicating value, and the importance of customer relationships. So to start off, since Scott and Brian are both in the chemical sales industry, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about it. In 2015, the total global revenue was about $3,840 billion, and the value of U.S. chemical sales alone in 2016 was $800 billion. This industry currently employs about 810,000 people in the United States, and the U.S. is the second top exporter of chemical goods. And just a fun fact to throw in there, because we are Midland and we are home to Dow Chemical, Dow in 2016 did about $48 million of sales. Brian Landis was the first person I interviewed, and he currently is an industry manager at Silica Derivatives, but he started out his sales career as a technical sales specialist at Dow Chemical, where he worked for 5 years. After that, he moved to PQ Corporation, where he was an account manager for 7 years. He then became an account executive, where he held that position for about 1 3 quarters. And then he became a national accounts manager, where he worked for about 5 years. And while he was in that position, him and his team managed about 80% of the company's business, which was billions of dollars in sales annually. And he still works for PQ Corporation currently, but his national accounts management position moved to his position as an industry manager at Silica Derivatives, and that's where he works now and has worked for the past 6 years. He explained this role as kind of an end of the road for sales because he still does manage a few accounts, but he's mostly there for consultation and writing out contracts and things like that. The next person I interviewed was my father, Scott Panning, who was a sales team leader at Van Waters and Rogers, which is currently known as Univar. He started there right out of college. He worked as a customer service inside sales rep for 1.5 years. He was then promoted to an outside sales rep, where he worked for 1.5 years, then was promoted to a sales manager, where he worked for 1 year, and then advanced further to a branch manager, where he worked for 6 years. And during his time there, him and his team were able to more than double their sales revenue from $7 to $15 million. And he finished out his career there as a sales team leader / district manager, where he was in charge of about 14 salespeople and was in charge of about $53 million. And he said that he really thought it was a good experience to start on the inside and to start at a low-level position, because he said that really helped him to get a good view of the whole sales industry within his company, and what he could and couldn't ask his inside salespeople to do when he was trying to make a sale to someone. And he said that really helped to build teamwork and a sense of camaraderie within himself and his team. Finally, the third person I interviewed was Mike Cook, who's involved in the software sales industry. Just a little bit about it. He sells ERP, which is Enterprise Resource Planning, and what this does is it kind of helps bring the accounting, procurement, project management, and manufacturing aspects of a business all together from one point of access. So instead of having to log on to 50 different accounts and make sure everything matches up, this software does all of that for you. It brings it all together, and this makes it so that a CEO for a company and maybe an inside customer service sales rep will have the same view and the same information, which makes it easier for everything to be reconciled. So in 2016, the software and sales industry did about $32.6 billion in sales, and since it has started, it has only grown very rapidly, and it's going to continue to grow as our society gets more involved with technology. So finally, about Mike Cook, he is currently the Director of Sales at Strategic Information Group. He started out his sales career as a general manager for RCM Technologies, where he worked for 12 years. He then moved on to Infor Global Solutions, where he was a regional VP, and he worked there for 2 years. Then he advanced to Cortex Services as a director of sales, where he worked for 1.25 years. And then he came to his position where he is now at Strategic Information Group, where he works as a director of sales. He sells ERP software and other related services, and he likes to say that he's the I'm sorry guy, because he's in a director position, so he's in a management position, and he helps his team with sales that they might have messed up on a little bit to try to fix that and help fix the relationship. And he also helps, with consultation with his team for more difficult sales that they might have to make. So the first question I asked is about self-leadership, and it is, how has self-leadership helped you to succeed in your career, and why is it important to you? Now, Brian said that without self-leadership, it would definitely mean failure within the industry. And an example that he gave is that his company is owned by banks, and although the banks are very strict financially, they're not necessarily looking over their shoulder from a management perspective and telling them what they should be doing, how many sales they should be making a day, and things like that. So Brian said it's very important to have self-responsibility with yourself and within your team. And he said that this is one of the key reasons, good self-leadership, was why that him and his team never lost business in 20 years. Scott made the point about self-leadership that it's really important to be accountable to yourself. Mike also made this point, but it's important to have resilience in case you get turned down for a sale, that you don't let that kind of derail your whole day, and you still have to go out and you have to try and make more sales with just as much confidence as you had before. So Mike and Scott both made the point that it's important to put in a full day, and Mike even went a step further and said that it's important to establish a routine for yourself because that really helps you to make sure you are putting in a full day work. For example, Mike said that he gets up every day, works out, he starts his day with a phone call at 8:30 and ends his day with a phone call at 3:30 or whatever time that may be, just to make sure he's getting as much out of his day as possible. The next question I asked was about understanding the buyer, and this question was, I asked them if they could give an example of a time that they struggled to understand the buyer, what they did to overcome the hurdle, and what that outcome was. So Brian talked about how there's a difference between commodity and technical sales, and he said his is more technical because it's about the chemical and the different stuff the chemicals can do for the companies they're selling to. But he said the very first thing to do before you even try to understand the buyer is to form a relationship based on trust, and you have to do this by establishing credibility about yourself and about the company you're selling for. So he said once you do that, it's important to do Socratic selling, which is where he knows the point that he wants his customer to arrive to, but he said it's important to ask the right questions so that they also arrive at that point in a comprehensive way. And once they arrive there, you can kind of begin to understand the buyer and understand what their needs are based on the questions you've been asking them. He also talked about how there's 5 levels of separation, and basically that, in today's day and age with all the technology, there's at least one thing you can find that you relate with the person on, and you should find that thing and start from there before you try pitching anything to them. And Scott said that what he thinks is even more difficult than understanding the buyer is understanding or forming a relationship with someone you don't necessarily like. And he gave the example of this maybe being someone who was really difficult, very demanding, high maintenance, mean, rude. Maybe a lot of other people don't like to do work with them. They might lie about their golf score when you're out golfing with them. He said it's important just to smile, say congrats, and do everything you can to go the extra mile for them because they're difficult for you, they're probably difficult for other people, and other people probably won't go the extra mile like you are, so this is just another way to differentiate yourselves from others. And Mike said that it's really important to establish the difference between, the budget being a problem or something else being a problem, because once you decide whether or not the budget's a problem, you can decide what the problem actually is, and then you can actually begin to understand the buyer and what their needs and their wants are from it. He also said it's important to make sure there are no political agendas or any hidden motives going on, which goes back to what Brian said about asking the right questions. And Mike also gave an example of when him and his company weren't really sure whether or not someone would be interested in purchasing their services, and a lot of people from his company said that this gentleman wouldn't because he was older. He was getting ready to retire, and he had an older company. And people said that since he was older and that this is newer software, he wouldn't be interested in it. But Mike followed his gut, took a chance, saw that this man had recently authored a book, rented the book, read it on his way down, established a relationship with him, asked him the right questions, began to understand what his needs were, and was able to pitch him a sale catered to what he needed for his company. And it ended up actually being the largest sale in the company's history. The next question I asked was about building trust, and it was, in your experience, what has been the quickest way that you have seen trust lost or gained in a relationship? And if possible, how can you build that trust back up once it's been lost? So Brian said that, this cliche statement remains true, and it's that trust takes years to build, but it can be lost in seconds. And he gave an example of when himself was out to eat with someone from another company, a purchaser, and they lied about the amount of profitability that would come from increasing their business together. but the person who was from the other company, they had someone else with them, and that other person held them accountable and said, actually, this isn't true. And Brian made the point that although trust had been lost between himself and that purchaser, what he did was he established a new relationship between the VP of his company and the VP of the company they were selling to. That way they were able to start over and create a new relationship based on trust. And Scott said that the best way to create trust is to keep the commitments that you make. And he gave an example of when this was recently after Johnson & Johnson had their Tylenol recall, so they were already kind of on the edge with PR and just the public and maintaining their brand image. And some of the chemicals that Van Waters and Rogers had sold to Johnson & Johnson had some defects that were coming out, so that Johnson & Johnson made a sales call with Scott and another team member, and they basically yelled at them the whole time, and Scott said that he resolved that by just being very, very, very genuine. He said he actually shed a tear and started crying and just apologized profusely for what happened and said, this is unacceptable. If you'll just give us one chance, we'll make this up to you tenfold. We'll do everything we can to fix it. And he said they actually gave him a small piece of business back, and they were able to, slowly after years build that relationship back up. And his point was that you need to always be selling ABS, and that people might give you a small piece of business as a test to see if you can turn that into a good thing for a larger piece of business. Now, Mike said that it's important to, be genuine, as Scott said, and within that, treat customers like family and friends, and don't just treat them like someone you're selling to. It's important to acknowledge your own mistakes and fix them, find ways to fix them. And as Scott said, it's important to keep your commitments. The next question I asked was about building a customer network, and it was, how has a customer network helped you this far in your career, and how did you build it, and how do you continue to build it? So Brian said it's important to get to know the person at the desk, and what he meant by that was that it's just important not just to get to know the person that you're selling directly to, but the person that works for them, the person that works under them, and the person that they're working for, so that you can establish good credibility among everybody within their business. And he said it's kind of like a pyramid scheme, because the nicer you are to more people and the more people you get to know, the more people they'll tell about you, and it just kind of increases your customer network. He also said that, a good old-fashioned way to do it would just be through trade shows. And within that, Scott said, kind of relating back to what Brian said about getting to know the person at the front desk, is that it's important to build a network within a relationship so that you can get to know people that the person you're selling to knows, and they can tell you even more about that person that you wouldn't have known otherwise. Scott said it's also important to stay organized with your sales contacts. That way you can stay up to date with them, send them notes, let them know you're thinking of them. And Mike said that it does help if you have a lot of time in the market, so that you can maintain verticality in a market, so you can kind of, get to see all sides of the sales cycle and how it works, and get to know the ins and outs and get to know even more people. And that just kind of goes with staying active in the sales market. The next question I asked was on the importance of teamwork, and it's, how does teamwork play an important role in sales? So Brian said that it's important to surround yourself with people that are smarter than yourself, and he gave an example of a time he went on a sales call. He brought one of his technical specialists, and this was a sales call with someone they'd been doing business with for many, many years. And the technical specialist actually said, hold on, what if we do this, but we do this with this product? And Brian said he never would have thought about it, and they're still currently working on it, but it's set to go into play this upcoming year. And because of the sales, or the technical specialist, it's actually going to increase profitability tenfold, because that person was there and he knew the more technical side of the sales than Brian did. So he said he likes to call his job bringing in the donuts, just kind of coming in, bringing the people that work for him what he needs, and just being there as consultation and as a team leader to help them establish or to get done what they want to get done. And Scott kind of had the same attitude about it. He said, from this aspect, entry-level jobs are important because you get to know everyone in the business, whether it's, customer service, inside sales, the person driving the truck, the person doing the filing or the copying, and just different stuff like that. The more people you get to know, the more helpful they can be to you, and the more helpful they can be to your customer. Mike made the point that the more complex a sale is, the more teamwork you're going to need, and that's why he said he always brings someone from pre-sales and an engineer with him. That way, if a customer keeps asking them, can you do this, can you do this, can you do this, he can say, hold on, let me check with my expert, and that'll show that the person that they're selling to, that he's being honest and authentic with them and what he's trying to sell. The next question I asked is about earning commitment, and it is, what is the most difficult aspect of earning commitment? What are some things you do to make sure you are earning commitment? Brian said that he asks exploratory questions that he can make sure that, they're starting off on the right page, the same page, and that they can go from there. And the answers from the questions, depending on those, you can ask the right questions and determine how quickly you should move forward with the relationship. And from these questions that you ask, Brian said you can establish a ballpark so that, say, the person's budget is $5 million, but you can't go any lower than $20 million. He makes the point that, maybe that sale isn't the thing that needs to happen. And Scott and Mike both made the example or the point that it's always important to ask for the sale, because you could do all this work leading up to it, but if you don't ask for it, you'll never get it. Scott said that something that he did is learn to read upside down, because then if someone gets up to leave from the desk, you can maybe get a little insight to what they're thinking, and you can use that to further improve your sales pitch. And that goes right in hand with being observant to different office decorations. And again, the more complex the sale, the more structure you're going to need. And Mike said that it's important to establish a sequence of events and include the person you're selling to within that, so that they feel, or so that it forms a relationship with them and they feel connected with you. My next question was about addressing concerns, and it is, how do you handle potential customers' concerns with your product? Have you noticed a trend in language or solutions that are the most effective at appeasing concerns? And Brian said that, a problem is just an opportunity to add value, but it's also a problem for competitors to add value too. So you need to actually address the concerns and, say, listen, you're right here. And this kind of goes back with week 12, chapter 8, where we talked about, if someone is unsure about the sale, you can say, you know what, I failed to show you the true value of this product and what it could bring you. So we said it's important to repeat concerns and ask for the impact of these concerns. And then if they keep asking for more on your end, you should ask to expand the relationship. And Scott said that it's important to ask the right questions. And when you're selling something, it's important to talk about the benefits of that product specifically and not just the general features. And you should also continue calling, even if they're not making a sale. That's just another way to differentiate yourself from the competitors. So Mike said it's important to have good value propositions, which again goes with talking about the benefits, not just the features. And he said you should have diplomacy when talking about the competitors and why your product is better than theirs. The next question I asked is about ethics in sales, and it is, what ethics do you uphold? How have you seen ethics play an important role in your relationship with customers? In what ways do you think it is easy to do unethical things in sales? And Brian said that it's always important to have integrity. There are rules to point to, like antitrust or different things, especially within his industry, if someone's tempting you to go back on your ethics. And he said that, within commission-based selling, it's always easy for people to rationalize things, so it's important to stay true to your ethics. Scott said the best way to do this is to tell the truth about what you're doing, but that sometimes it's okay to leave the very, very specific details out. Mike said it's important to establish trust, and he said that it's always easy to say yes, so he always goes into a sale with a reason to say no, so that he can't say no, because in his words, people think of you as just a salesperson until you make an objection, and that's an important point that he made. The next question I asked is the importance of communication, and it is, what is the most important part of communication to you, and what is the biggest lesson you have learned from communication in your career? So Brian said it's important to be brief and to the point, and to use the important form of communication, whether it's a phone call, text message, or email. And he said it's important to follow up to clarify. Scott said it's important to think through anything you say, especially if it's controversial or emotional. You should be open with your body language. Your arms shouldn't be crossed. You should be leaning forward and engaged. And he said, as simple as it is, it's important to be polite. And as Mike said, it's important to have good verbal, email, and nonverbal communication, nonverbal being the most important, because as he said, it matters what they meant, not what they said, and the nonverbal cues are the best way to establish that. The next question I asked is on communicating value, and it is, what is your go-to strategy for communicating the value of your product to the customer you are selling to? So Brian said that it's important to cater the value of your company to the needs of your customer, and he said that one time he did this, it actually doubled the profitability within his company. And Scott again said it's important to focus on the benefits, not just the general features of what you're selling them. And it's important to show them that you value them over your company and that you have their needs at hand. And Mike said it's important to have a well-structured value proposition and know the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of what you're selling. We also have the importance of customer relationships, and that is, what do you think the most important thing is in a customer relationship? What do you do to show the customers that you value their relationships? Brian said that this is all based on trust. It's important to keep personalized notes. You need to smile and maintain eye contact, as simple as that is. And Scott said that they need to trust that you're looking out for their best interests. And a lot of times they, with their company, did entertainment, and they said $1 spent on entertaining is $1 well spent, and you should entertain for the relationship, not the business. Mike went along with that, said that trust was important, and he had a dissatisfied customer one time, and he said, I'm sorry about what happened in the past, but here's what I'll do to fix it for the future. And he said, you can always go into a situation, and people are going to be either negative towards you, neutral, or positive towards you, and you should always go in with the goal of moving people one peg over from negative to neutral or neutral to positive. So my 3 takeaways from my interviews with these people were that it's always good to look for a reason to say no. That way you can show you do have their best interest at heart, and that comes from Mike's advice. And from Scott, I learned that it's good to go for the hard and intimidating sales because that's just another way to differentiate yourself from the competition. And from Brian, I think it's a good reminder just to always be polite and smile, as simple as that may be. And that wraps up my presentation.